Welcome to the Collective Trauma live event series with Thomas Hübl and the second talk on collective witnessing for deep healing. We're super excited to have over 16,000 people now registered for this special webinar series. My name is Richard Tabinger, and I'll be your co-host today, along with Laura Calderon de la Barca. Laura is an integral, intuitive psychotherapist, cultural analyst, and collective healing researcher. She has studied with Thomas since 2016 and is a graduate of the Pocket Project training. Welcome, Laura.
Hello, Richard, and hi, everybody. A very warm welcome, and I'm delighted to be part of the team today hosting this call. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks, Laura. Now, before we get started, I want to make a few quick announcements. First, Laura and I will be monitoring your questions below in the Q&A box, so you can submit those and we will be able to field some questions at the end. You can submit questions at any time by clicking on the Q&A button found at the bottom of your Zoom window or by tapping the screen on your mobile device. If you have any technical difficulty during this session, our support team is available on how to address any tech issues, comments, and concerns. You can also contact support by emailing onlinecoursesupport@thomashubel.com. Second, the flow for today's talk is that Thomas will do a teaching about collective witnessing, and then we'll come together for a collective group practice led by Thomas. And then at the end, we're going to conclude with a Q&A session. And lastly, before we start, if you haven't had a chance to watch the first video in the series and you're watching here, I encourage you to go back and watch that broadcast called Collective Trauma in a Changing World. Now, if you're watching this event currently live, when we send out the replay, we'll also give you a link to that first video. And if you're already watching the replay of this broadcast or this event, then you can navigate on the top of the tabs to get instant access. And that was a really great first video session, and it sets the foundation for why this topic is so important for humanity at this time. And then lastly, we have a third and final event happening on August 6th in another, I think it's a week and a half on a Thursday. With all that, let me introduce Thomas Hübl for those of you who may be new to his work. Thomas is a spiritual teacher, a speaker, author, and the founder of the Academy of Inner Science. He has worked with more than 100,000 people worldwide through workshops, multi-year training programs, and online courses. Last year, Thomas hosted an inaugural event called Collective Trauma Online Summit that attracted over 50,000 participants. And this fall, we'll be broadcasting an all-new summit called Collective Trauma Summit 2020, The Power of Collective Healing. And never has this topic been more relevant. And Thomas also has a forthcoming book on collective trauma that will be published later this year. Hi, Thomas. Today, we're going to be talking about collective witnessing for deep healing. Welcome.
Thank you, Richard. And hello, everybody. Yes. So maybe I'll give a short summary and then I'll hand it over to you, Laura, again. Maybe I'll give a short summary of the last talk that we did some 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago. Collective trauma basically means that trauma can be understood as a biographical event, something that happened to me, during my childhood, that happened to me during a car accident or during a war or any kind of very violent or adverse situations. And but when we look at the history of humanity, we all know that we are sitting in a much wider net of trauma. So trauma has been going on for thousands, tens of thousands, and most probably millions of years. And that's also why our nervous systems developed an internal response or process that we call trauma when we experience something very overwhelming in order to survive mostly the situation better. So the trauma response is actually a very intelligent function that's here to protect us. But if it's unresolved and if it's not reintegrated as an experience, it has sometimes severe side effects and symptoms in our lives. And last time I started a call with, you know, when the first astronauts went into outer space, and there was this very famous first photograph of the planet, and we call this the overview effect, like the first picture taken. And when we see that image, we see the system that we are part of. It enlarged our perspective. We could look at the planet from the outside. We call this in the consciousness development or spiritual development, subject-object transcendence. So we see the system from a bigger perspective. And that had a tremendous impact. But even the one that took the photo was part of a collective trauma net. So it looks like we are seeing the planet from outer space, but we don't see on that photo how hurt the fabric of life is on that planet. And so if we just look at events like the Holocaust, like the Second World War, slavery and racism, the Native American genocide, dictatorships, other genocides on the planet, like there are massive war scars around the planet. And so many of us, or most of us, have been affected by collective trauma, some of us more, some of us less, by intergenerational or transgenerational trauma transmission, the trauma that our ancestors went through, the trauma that our cultures went through before we came into life. So now we came into a world that is partly integrated. I often say integrated history is presence. These are the functions and the developments and the evolution of life that we all operate through. So we are thinking, we are feeling, we are having emotions, we have bodies, all of that developed over a long period of time. At the same time, we are also sitting in a world where certain agreements, certain unconscious patterns, certain society patterns, the way politics are running, the way our societies are fragmented and polarized, many symptoms. And fundamentally, the fact that we experience ourselves and others often as separate, that we feel isolated, that we feel alone, that we feel cut off, and all the side effects that that has. So that's a little bit the framing. That's also what we spoke about last time. And this time in our talk, conversation, and meditation, we want to explore more what is actually the power of witnessing. How can we start healing collective trauma? And next time we will continue the conversation. So that's a little bit of the framing of today's talk. Maybe I hand it over back to you, Laura, to guide us through this hour.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for a very precise and rich sharing of what we spoke of last time. And I would like to start by asking you, as you were mentioning these large scars of collective trauma that have been left with us after the different events throughout the history of humanity. I've heard you speak of how, as we do our own individual work, we are contributing to collective trauma healing. And so when there's all these really large aspects that we're looking at, can you share with us, how does my individual work contribute to collective trauma healing?
Right. Yeah. First of all, many people nowadays, and I'm sure many of us here that are on this call right now, we are already naturally interested in healing our stress, in healing certain issues in our lives, in our relationships, in our internal expression. Many of us are interested in some contemplative practices. Like, all of this is already a great contribution to heal collective trauma. Because it starts with me. Always, like I often say in the healing work, in doubt, come back to yourself. So when it's not clear, then it's not clear, first of all, in me. And then that's where I have to start. So the healing starts always with the personal healing, because if I expose myself too much to all kinds of collective dynamics, and I'm very traumatized myself, so I just overload myself. So I need to first start in creating more resilience, resourcing, integration in myself. And that's an amazing contribution to the healing of the world too. So that's because everybody who heals a part of him or herself heals it for the wider community too. So my own healing process is inherently interwoven, and that's what I meant before, that I'm not separate and you are not another. Like, we are interconnected and interdependent. That means when you heal, something in me also grows, and something in us also grows. And it makes it easier for other people to heal as well. That's the amazing thing in an interconnected and interdependent universe. When we play music, every string and every tune affects everyone else. We are all sitting as a big orchestra, and we are many musicians of a big orchestra. So we affect each other. And that's where compassion comes in. That's where mutual witnessing comes in. And so when we look at the healing of collective trauma, we are looking at it basically, let's say, if you want to keep it simple for today, my personal healing, smaller healing architecture, smaller groups, like appropriately sized groups, where we can do kind of more intimate healing work, and then the large group containers, and I will speak about this in a minute, where hundreds or thousands of people can come together and create a healing container, which I believe that's the world of healing that we are walking into in the next decades, that we spaces become the healing resource for individuals within those we spaces. And I think that's going to help us to accelerate, in a way, the healing of collective trauma, because we could say, wow, it's a kind of a never-ending story, because there's so much trauma in the world. So how we will ever, it's kind of a huge iceberg, and we are just, operating with some small, tiny pieces. But I think the collective coherence is a big factor of the healing work, and reducing the levels of stress and rebuilding our life base, basically.
That's lovely, Thomas. And what I also hear is that inside of that, there is a change in the way in which we conceive ourselves. So there's a change in identity, where I go from thinking that my body is just mine as an individual, and my body is part of a larger field. And so who I am is like a particle in a larger wave. So can you speak more to how, first, we've been speaking about collective witnessing. Can you talk a bit to what you mean by that term, and how is that different from individual witnessing?
Right. So as we said before, like, the more I become integrated through my own healing work, through their own integration work, through tending and seeing also the intelligence of the patterns that I developed to protect myself, especially during my childhood development, that all what seems like a problem, a weakness, a difficulty in my life, when I actually rewind my biography, I will see that at that time when it came into being, when I brought these defense mechanisms and separation in myself into being, it was very needed. It was the most intelligent thing. And so when I tend to that, so I often say my body, my physical body, my emotional experience, my mental experience, we create some kind of inner coherence, so that there's a flow through my nervous system, and I can experience myself more wholly and wholesome, and I can experience you more fully. So that coherence means that witnessing is not merely a a cognitive process. So when I read in the newspaper about something that happened, or I see it on my phone, or I see it on the news, or I see it on the internet, or I hear it through you, that you tell me, listen, Thomas, that and that happened. So especially now we are in a kind of a time of collective trauma through COVID, and that's a huge global stress factor that shows us many underlying fractures and fragmentations in our society. And so when I am a witness, it means I'm a cognitive, an emotional, and a physical witness. And I think through collective trauma, we might be partly disembodied. So which means I can't feel certain parts of myself. That's the nature of trauma, that I shut down certain parts because I got overwhelmed, but now it's numb. And so I don't know usually what I don't see and what I don't feel. And when I'm listening to you, to another person, or I hear that something happened in my society, I might be way less touched by that because I have filters of indifference or numbing in myself. So there's the individual work that we do, that I become more of a resonance body, like the guitar. If you play music, so you pull the strings, but you hear music because of the resonance body that amplifies the tunes. And if you sit in an orchestra, and many people have resonance bodies and strings, so then you hear like a collective music. So there's the individual witnessing, which is based on inner coherence and compassion, and the willingness to participate in society, the willingness to feel what certain events, who am I in relation to that event? And if I ask myself that question, who am I in relation to an event that I hear about in my society, in my culture, in my country, in my city? And then I will see, in order to be a full witness, a contemporary witness, it's a physical, I feel something in my body, I feel something in my emotions, and I understand something about the situation. And if I take this onto a bigger level, it means also that we can come together, like many of us, and create collective resonance bodies. So let's say if there are a few thousand people online right now, and you speak, your voice resonates in thousands of people that listen to you. And if we come together in a generosity, because we want to participate in one another's like experience, if I really want to find out how you feel and how you relate to a certain issue, let's say of your country, a traumatization of Mexico, or how you relate to racism in the US, and all the pain that has been created. So when you speak, or you speak how the Holocaust affected you, it doesn't matter. There are so many examples around the world. So when we listen to voices within the collective field, and we come together because we have a commitment to take care of the legacy that we have been born into, and maybe we also contributed to already. It's both, because we are all alive already decades. So maybe we consciously or unconsciously contributed to the legacy, we reinforced it. And there is a whole legacy of our ancestors going through traumatizing events or being part of the traumatization. And the collective witnessing, I believe, is a function that arises when many people come together with a deep interest, a genuine interest, with a capacity to listen, so that I really want to understand your experience, not just what I hear. There's what I feel when you speak, and then there's the capacity to put myself in your shoes. William Ury, the very known mediator, says it very beautifully. Can we put ourselves into the shoes of others? Because we are all, as he calls it, part of the third side. every conflict always is our conflict. We are part of the third side, and I think it's a beautiful description. We call this global social witnessing. Can I become like a witness of my society? And can we become witnesses, the immune system of our society? And so when you speak, every one of us that is online right now has a reflection of you inside. So there's Laura, who speaks here, the woman that sits somewhere in a location on the planet. And there is the Laura in everybody who's listening right now, or everybody who is listening while I speak has a small Thomas inside, the nervous system, the perception, coded in his or her history of life. And that's what makes witnessing also, it sounds easier than it is, because if I grow up and I'm conditioned by a certain culture, so if I grew up in the US, I have been conditioned by the US culture, and certain aspects of the collective trauma of the US, of the collective trauma of Germany, of Israel, of Argentina, of China, will be a filter in the way I perceive you, will be a filter in the way I perceive the political, like the government, will be a filter in the way I perceive social dynamics or social injustice or the pain that is being created every day. So that part doesn't make it into my conscious awareness often. And sometimes that's kind of a chosen fact, but often it's also an unconscious fact. And so we have to put more awareness to the whole capacity of witnessing, because witnessing is already a step towards collective healing. And I believe that's one aspect how we can get to the underlying forces that creates the polarization and the fragmentation that we see in many societies around the world, that we see displayed in many political systems, because it seems normal that politicians argue with each other. So we say, okay, that's politics. Because I saw this as a 3-year-old, I saw it as a 15-year-old, and I see it still today. So I could say, that's how politics works. And I'd say, no, that's how politics works in a collectively traumatized and fragmented world, because the fragmentation in the government is the fragmentation of the society. That's a voice of the collective. And so once we get to the underlying polarization, that is a symptom of a wound, we can start healing the real wound and not be hypnotized by the symptom. And I believe there are already enough people that are genuinely interested, and we see it in the resonance of, for example, of the last summit that we had last year, the first summit, and 53,000 people turned up to really engage, and there was a great participation, as you know. And so there is a genuine interest in collective dynamics. And I believe looking forward, COVID's not going to be the only global trauma challenge that is ahead of us. And I think so that's why I think it's very timely to come together and take care of the collective wounds and not be too hypnotized by collective symptoms. And I believe collective witnessing is definitely one core ingredient. And the last thing maybe to that is that I have seen, we have done over the last 18 years so many processes in workshops and large groups, sometimes dealing with collective trauma and also working on the healing and integration of severe collective trauma. And I have seen moments when one person spoke and hundreds of people were completely there. And that's something that I think is very powerful, that when I come with a real intention that I feel that I'm part of life, and I want to take care of the health of life and the health of the base of life. And when we create in a group, it's not just coming together in a group. It's coming together in a group with certain ingredients or spices. And one of them is safety. To create a sense of safety, that it's safe to be vulnerable, that it's safe to open up to a certain extent, that it's safe to relate to one another, that it's safe to show myself in front of a group, which is very challenging often, because it's often very scary to speak about some very personal matters or transgenerational matters in front of hundreds or thousands of people. And then another ingredient is that we really listen to each other, and we want to participate in each other's experience. That's different from me being emotionally affected by what you say. This is one thing, and that inevitably is going to happen. But then there is another step, that I really want to feel you, because I don't know because what I experience is not necessarily what you experience. And so the attunement, the presencing, I often say presence and seeing is the same. Seeing is presence, and presence sees what is now. And so when we bring certain ingredients into a group, then there's a moment when that coherence level is so high that the whole collective jumps into a much stronger level of presence. And that is what I call the kind of re-emergence of the collective witness. That's when the collective becomes aware of itself. There's a bigger perspective than us looking at each other and us listening to each other. Like suddenly we are in this different state experience of incredible presence. And I experience this always as an incredible healing power. So that's like when we all bring together the fuel that it seems like is in different fuel tanks in our cars, and suddenly there's a collective fuel that drives the engine of us. And whenever I saw that emerge in many, many group events, I felt that's very hopeful, because together in that higher coherence, we have a tremendous capacity to integrate the legacy of our past. And why is that so important? Because healing our past is opening our future. I have seen this often, that when people heal parts of their past, their future becomes wider, bigger, more expressive, more happy, more alive, more wholesome, more loving, more present. And so that the emergence of that super coherence or higher coherence that emerges when a group is connected enough, I think is also part of the next level of human evolution.
That is so beautiful, and it feels so hopeful to hear you speak about this, Thomas. And it seems to me also that part of what we want is to be able to become a part of this, especially now when we are facing so many different challenges in our world. So my next question for you would be, how can we create this? How can we bring this to the challenges that we are facing? Collective witnessing and what you're just describing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the one hand, as we started before, like it starts with that if I feel that there are certain things in my life that are difficult for me, and that I really want to address those and heal the roots of the difficulty, that's one thing, that's one contribution. So my own personal healing journey is definitely a great contribution. Then the second is when I participate in your healing, because the great thing is that the individual and the collective are interdependent, they're not separate. I often say, like, my body, Thomas, my body, there's a part of my body that is Thomas and Thomas's personal life. There's another part of my body that is Thomas in relation to the whole universe, the collective, the planet, the nature, every country on the planet, all the things that are happening. So I have a relation to the world that I live in. It's a relational universe. And then there is the transpersonal part of Thomas. And all of it we call Thomas's body. Because if my body, when we really look at it, it's not, I don't know, almost 50 years old. It's hundreds of thousands of years old. Every life that led up to me living right now and to you living right now and to everybody who is listening living right now, you know how many lives are connected to us sharing this talk? It's billions of people that are connected to us sharing this moment. Because everybody has a huge ancestral tree. And so that life developed the organs sticking together and the emotional system that we can feel each other, that we can create committed relationships, parenting, you know, intimate relationships, workplaces, the mental capacities. If you just imagine how many people thought about similar things 100 years ago, 500 years ago. Plato thought about amazingly ingenious things already, or Socrates. You know, we are not the first ones that are talking about this kind of stuff. And so there is, first of all, the recognition that my body goes back into the planet, that my body is part of the planet and all the other levels. So health is not just an individual thing. Health is my individual lifestyle and the way I make my choices. But health is the way I'm related, how I'm taking care of the relations, the closer relations, the further relations, my relation to the world I'm living in, the contributions that I make and what I take. There are so many layers of relationality up to my relation to spirit, to the divine. And all of it is part of me speaking right now, and you speaking right now, and us being here together. So I think that interrelatedness, and so if in the groups, when one person shares about something that's happening or a healing that's happening in a person in front of, let's say, hundreds of people, that healing becomes like a ripple that ripples out and touches everybody who has a similar issue inside. And the group is a resonance body that amplifies the healing for the person. So there's a fuel that helps the person to heal, and the healing affects many people that are in the group. So there is this constant positive spiral, like healing field, that is just going on and on and on, and we grow together. And that's why I think healing and the participating in each other's healing is something we can do. We can build this kind of containers, and many people are doing this anyway. That's a tremendously powerful resource.
It's beautiful, Thomas. And I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to say before we move into the practice, which I'm sure we're all excited about, getting a bit of a taste of what you're talking right now.
Right. I think also let's because we talked already a lot now, and maybe it's good to let it drop in, and maybe we can drop in together. I mean, there are many people online right now. We are a collective field, and maybe we can just for some minutes drop in together, and then afterwards we can also look at some questions that come in and have a bit of an exchange. And as I said before, like healing and also collective healing and collective presencing starts with our bodies, because our bodies are very, very wise. You know, we are also not the first ones that are practicing the healing arts or that are healing. That happened over thousands of years. People got hurt and people healed. People got hurt and people healed. There were massive traumatizations already before us, and we also healed some of it again. So all of that sits in our bodies, and today we call this, like with a modern word, we call it resilience, or we call it self-healing mechanism. The fact that our bodies want to heal means that healing has happened many, many times, so that our bodies carry the intelligence of all the things that healed in the past too. That's amazing. And that's something we can trust. That's a resilience, and that's a capacity that we carry inside. And so when we take a moment and we start again with ourselves and we just take a breath and let the exhalation take us into the body. And then I take another breath, and I slow down a little bit the way I exhale. I prolong it a bit. And I feel my physical body. The wave naturally takes me into the body. I can feel my body posture, myself breathing. And I can also maybe feel the aliveness in certain areas of my body. The aliveness, the streaming vitality. I can feel the parts of my body where I feel more present, anchored in my body. And then I can also take a moment and just connect to life wanting to be alive until today for a long, long time. The fact that I'm alive means many generations wanted to be alive, contribute to life, live life. So my body carries the wisdom of all the ancestors being alive. I'm living in and as one big tradition on the planet, and that's the tradition of life. It's kind of a unified tradition of sharing the spark of life, which is sacred. And then I have an emotional experience, I have a physical experience, an emotional experience. And check in what that is right now. I also have a mental experience. I can check in with that for a moment. And then I am aware of me feeling my body I'm aware of feeling my emotions, my mind. What's the awareness? I can witness myself. I can witness me feeling myself. I feel my body and I'm aware of feeling my body. What's the awareness? So there is that dimension of witnessing. And then I can, even if it seems at first that my mind says, oh, I'm sitting alone, but most probably many people all around the world are tuning in right now with this moment together, listening to the same words, part of the same we or group. And if I open myself to just get a sense, to sense into a kind of collective space that we all create right now by sitting, feeling our bodies, witnessing, feeling our bodies, feeling the collective field of everybody on this call. And we are all connected just by the intention of joining. And we can sense each other. So that's the witnessing of our space as a kind of community for this 1 hour. And then, if you want, you can take wherever you call in from. If you choose one dynamic, one aspect, one issue of the culture the country that you live in, one social dynamic, that for a few moments you become a witness of, with the question, if it comes up for you, it's something that you noticed recently or it was very important for you as a social cultural dynamic. And then to ask yourself the question, who am I in relation to that event? What do I feel physically, emotionally? How do I frame it? And how am I related? What do I feel physically? What's my physical response to that? What's my emotional response? my cognitive framing, and my relation. Do I feel connected, disconnected, separate, engaged? And it's very important to allow all those 4 dimensions just to emerge the way they emerge when you think of that cultural issue. It can be something in your neighborhood, in your town or city, the political system, social justice or injustice, dynamics around COVID, anything. When I am an embodied witness of that dynamic, who am I as part of that dynamic? The fact that I know about it means I'm part of it. And how do I own my participation? And then, given our time here, let's let go of that cultural event for a moment again. Let's take a deeper breath. Just come back to your own presence and body. Let's stay a few moments just with the presence of silence. And if anything wants to emerge in the presence of silence. And then to take a couple of deeper breaths and slowly come back. Well, we have a few more minutes for questions that came in. Maybe we can just take them now.
Thomas. Well, thank you so much for that beautiful meditation. And Richard, could you start bringing in some of the questions we got today, please?
Sure. And I think we could probably be on this call for many hours, but we have 3 videos this summer, and then we have a whole summit, an amazing summit that we have planned for the fall. So just mentioning that, we have some incredible speakers and visionaries and activists. So I think the time is really right to get this out. And then, so Thomas, your timing is impeccable with this topic, or bringing it forth in the world. So thank you so much. Let me bring forth some of the questions that people have contributed, and we have so many great ones. So we're going to choose a few here. And we have one from Cynthia, and she's asking, collective coherence seems challenged by, ongoing traumatization of like global news and atrocities and the events around the world. So how do we work toward coherence and at the same time stay informed? So basically informed by life and not just this flow of media. It seems like I think what she's asking is the media almost tends to re-traumatize us. So how do we stay informed but not turn off, you know?
Right. That's a very important question. And I think it's up to every one of us to find out what's the appropriate regulation for us. So for some people, it might be that if I'm working right now through my own whatever traumatization, maybe I need to dial that back to a certain extent, the consumption of media and news, in order not to get constantly stimulated in a way that I can't yet integrate. So it's also because integration and healing also reestablishes a sense of regulation, that I know what's appropriate intake of information, of food, of activities, of technology, of news, that I can still process, and where am I just overloading my system. Because I am simply convinced that many of us consume more information cognitively than we can digest emotionally and physically. And if the dissonance between cognitive information and emotional dissociation is getting stronger and stronger, we actually become more and more numb. And that's not what we want. We want more and more healthy engagement. And healthy doesn't mean that it's comfortable. Many things that we might hear are uncomfortable to hear and to feel, but I'm still feeling them because I'm simply a part of this world. And feeling the discomfort of what it means to be aware of actions or things that happen around the world that are inappropriate, and we have to do something together as the immune system of the world to change that, is very important. So we don't want to cut that off and say live in a spiritual bypassing, but we also don't want to get overloaded. And that's why it's for every one of us, it's a dance to know what's the right thing for me and the world in the given situation. So we might be in different phases in our life, and it might be that somebody did a lot of work and suddenly like a trauma comes into our conscious awareness that we haven't been aware of, and we thought, wow, life is great and I did a lot of work, and then it seems like I'm in a different phase. So it's not just what I did in the past, it's what is appropriate for me now. But I love that when we are present and we can stay related, that we don't disconnect ourselves from the news, but that we find an appropriate regulation in order to be aware of what's happening in our world. And on the other hand, it's also important that why do we consume news? Because I think that in the way news or driving on the highway and seeing a car accident and just be curious what's happening there is not healthy. That's not our business. If we do it in order to help, great. If we are not helping, so better to continue. And let that be the privacy of the people that are involved. It doesn't need to be kind of voyeurism. And so I think for every one of us, it's very important. What's my motivation to consume information? And I think all of this is a very important question in the time of information being so available to us, that we need to implement the appropriate regulation in order to be healthy and support a healthy system.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's a couple other follow-up questions here. There's one from Rachel, and she's asking, you know, how can we both hold spacious, receptive, loving energy for those who are, you know, maybe doing some harm in the world and the collective or themselves, and then also know when to say no to harmful behavior. And so I think there could be this idea that maybe collective witnessing is more passive, you know, and versus maybe taking a more active approach. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's collective witnessing is more passive if I am carrying parts in myself where I'm indifferent or numb. So then witnessing is in consuming information what I meant before is also that I allow those events to land in me, and the more I will be a participant, because if I'm in relation to those events, I'm a participant of everything that's happening. It's not out there. I'm part of it. And then if the right action is to protect a certain part of the population or to protect children or to, of course, that's number one, because we want to protect life, and that needs certain actions and engagements. So it's not just a passive process. That's a very important question. I think it's very important. And at the same time, sometimes hyperactivism is a way to deal with the pain out there and not in here. So I think it goes in both ways. There is the indifference and maybe also often the spiritual bypassing or the escapism. And then on the other hand, there's an overemphasis on action because it's hard to feel. And in the middle, there's a healthy, regulated nervous system and experience that I know when to step in, and then I know when to really allow myself first to feel, because I often say reactivity is action before feeling, and responsiveness or responding is a feeling-informed action. And I think that's a big difference. If I'm reactive and that's why I'm acting, or if I'm responsive and that's why I'm acting. And I think we want to support more and more responsiveness and responsibility in the world, because that's kind of an interrelated way of action.
Right. There's some questions as to that, to the how this all works and how a group process works. And obviously in our last 5 minutes here, we can't get into that. And then there's also some questions about how do you actually facilitate groups and things like that. Can you just maybe just give us a high level overview of kind of how you work and what your process is?
Yeah. I mean, we will talk about this also in the third part when we talk about resilient community building, because I think that's going to be a very important part for the future. How on the planet we create community resilience, like individual, relational, and community resilience, in order to deal with the impacts that are going to come in the next decades, especially also through the climate change and all the changes that are happening on the planet through that, and maybe also other things. So I think we will talk about this more, but what I said before, like I often use this example from the Bible, that the Israelites on Mount Sinai and God appears, it's kind of a mass awakening, it's a collective awakening. And then everybody said, God spoke to me personally. God spoke to me, which means it addressed everybody. It's like as if God spoke to everybody, not just abstract stuff. No, it feels like it's me. I have been addressed, and not just me in my ego, but me in my core. And the healing principle that's in that is that the most individual is always an expression of the most collective or universal, and the most universal expresses itself through the most individual, which means awakening and the growth of consciousness is in when every one of us, when we support everybody to really express his or her potential or essence the most, if that's in our mutual interest, and that's the potential-oriented society that we build, that's deeply healing. And the other is what I said before, if one of us speaks and many people build, like create a resonance body around it, this is the fuel, this speeds up the person's healing, and the person's healing speeds up the healing of everybody that carries a similar issue, and we simply share many issues. And the third part is that the collective trauma layer lies dormant because it was here before we were born most of the time. And even if it happened in our life, it lies dormant in the kind of collective unconscious, and the group can become like a strong resonance field that allows a portion of the collective trauma to surface, to be experienced, and to be integrated. And that opens up a wider future, because that opens up new possibilities. And so that process is, of course, sophisticated, more complex than I say it now. That's why I think, as Richard, as you said, we need more time for this. But a group is a powerful resonance body that has a resonance towards the past, a resonance in 2020, and a resonance towards our higher future. Like the worlds that we're gonna create together are potentially already here, and we are the ones to receive it. Because why? Because we're alive. So every generation is here to bring an update into life. And so there's responsiveness or responsibility towards the future, this world horizontally, everybody whom we meet, and the past that is not integrated yet. And I think that these are all functions of being a human being.
Yeah, and I think you answered a lot of questions, because I think a lot of people are like, what can one individual do, or what happens if I feel overwhelmed? Like, we have a lot of questions in that vein, but it seems like it's a shared responsibility that, you know, we have to do in groups. Is that true?
That's very true. Like, and it's again a mix between the individual healing, the individual providing space for somebody else, and the community being there for everybody in the community. And I think that's when we experience the tremendous resource that we have when we are really together. And that doesn't mean that it's always comfortable being together, and it doesn't mean that there are no fragmentations and no rifts and gaps in between us. But if the coherence is stronger than the fragmentation, there is a kind of a self-healing field, and that's very, very powerful.
Yeah, and you said that earlier, where the body itself is a self-healing mechanism if you get cut or something. And it sounds like there might be some corollaries or some self-healing properties of the field itself when we come together. And so that's quite exciting, isn't it?
That's very exciting. That's exactly what it is. That self-healing mechanism is kind of the immune system of the world, and that's our ally. That's very important. And when we tap into that self-healing mechanism of the collective tissue wants to heal. We just need to create the circumstances for it.
Right. It's like a collective immune system or something to that effect.
That's right. That's right. And that's us. We are the collective immune system. All of us.
Well, we're past the hour here, and I'd love to continue. So I'd welcome everybody to share this video and the replay with others to let people know about this powerful series. And thanks for joining us today. We've had over 16,000 people sign up for the series so far. Hopefully we can get to over 20,000 people into the series. Thanks, Laura, for joining us and facilitating the conversation with Thomas today. Just a quick note, we're going to send out the recordings to this for this recording. So if you came in late or want to rewatch it, it'll be there. Our next event is August 6th, which is a Thursday, the same time, 9 a.m. Los Angeles, 12 p.m. New York, 6 p.m. Berlin. And that event's going to be on creating community coherence and resilience. Do you want to just say like 1 or 2 minutes about what that third event is about, Thomas?
Yeah, I believe like the relational capacities are in the self-regulation. So what practices can I have to regulate myself? How can we provide co-regulation? So when we get stressed out together, what can we do, and what powerful functions actually are in us that we might not know about? And then how to create the community coherence in order to speed up the intelligence, like to unleash the intelligence, the collective intelligence, the collective witnessing, and also the collective healing power. And all of this, I believe, is also our resilience when we face stronger stressors, systemic stressors. How we respond to those is very important. And the more fragmentation we have, the more polarization and friction we will experience. But the more coherence, community resilience we have, the more we will be able to respond to those in a more intelligent and integrated way. And I think that's a kind of a practice to prepare ourselves to get stronger for most probably the things to come in the future.
Okay, thank you so much. Can't wait for that next event. So that's August 6th, and we'll send you an invite and hope you all will join us for that final live event in the series. This will all be in preparation for a larger summit that will happen this fall. Stay tuned. We'll let you know more information about that. Thanks for spending your time here, everybody, to be with us today. This is a great use of our time to do something and to come together to think about what we can do and to do practices for collective trauma and collective healing. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Laura. We'll see you next time. Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.